I heard the water before I saw them, not the gentle trickle of the backyard fountain I had chosen 20 years ago, but the sharp, uneven splash of someone shifting too fast in a confined space. It was a sound that didn't belong on a quiet October afternoon in coastal Oregon, especially not on the morning of my 32nd wedding anniversary. I remember thinking for one strange second that maybe a raccoon had fallen into the spa tub behind our greenhouse. Then I heard a woman laugh, soft, breathless, intimate. My hands froze around the white bakery box I was carrying. Inside it sat a caramel pecan cake with the words, "Happy 32. Daniel and Marjorie," piped in gold icing. I had driven 40 minutes to pick it up myself because I wanted the day to feel special. I had no idea it was already ruined. I moved closer, my shoes crunching lightly on the gravel path. I told myself to stop, to turn around to give whoever it was privacy. But something cold had already started sliding through my veins, like the instinct animals have when they sense danger before seeing it. Then I heard his voice, low, familiar, laughing in a way he hadn't laughed with me in years. Daniel, my husband of 3 decades. My breath left me so suddenly. I had to grab the fence post to stay upright. The cedar wood scraped my palm, but I barely felt it. There was a pause, then the sound of water shifting again, and the woman whispered something I couldn't make out. His response came clearer. "You're safe here. She never comes back this early." She, not Marjorie, not my wife, just she. My heart slammed so hard, it felt like it was shaking my ribs loose. I stepped forward and saw them. Daniel's back was turned to me, his gray hair damp his shoulders, still broad, despite his 65 years. His arms were wrapped around a woman whose long, dark hair clung wetly to her neck. Her face tilted upward, and when she turned just enough for me to see it, my world didn't just crack. It collapsed, because the woman in my husband's arms was not a stranger. It was my daughter-in-law, Vanessa Carter, 34 years old, mother of my 2 grandchildren, wife of my son. The cake box slipped from my hands and hit the ground with a dull thud. They both jerked. Daniel turned first. I will never forget his expression. Not guilt, not shock, annoyance, like I had interrupted something inconvenient. Vanessa's face went pale. She sank lower into the water, covering herself, but her eyes didn't hold shame. They held calculation. And in that moment, standing there with caramel icing smeared across the gravel at my feet, I understood something that took me years to fully accept. This wasn't new. This wasn't a mistake. This was a secret that had been living in my home, under my roof, behind my back, for far longer than I imagined. The silence stretched. Daniel finally spoke. Well, he said, his voice flat, almost irritated. "You weren't supposed to see this like this. Like this. As if there were a better way to see your husband kissing your son's wife in the anniversary spa you had installed for him after his heart surgery." My throat burned, but no sound came out. Vanessa spoke next, surprisingly calm. "We should talk," she said. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Please forgive me." Just, "We should talk." Something inside me shifted right then. A quiet, precise click, like a lock turning. Because in that instant, I realized something else. Neither of them looked afraid. They looked prepared. And that meant this betrayal didn't just involve my marriage. It involved planning, secrets, possibly money, possibly something much worse. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I did something that would later become the first step in their downfall. I smiled, a small, steady smile that made Daniel frown in confusion. "Of course," I said softly. "We'll talk." Because at that exact moment, watching the 2 people I trusted most sit together in my spa like they owned my life, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not explode. I would not beg. I would not leave empty-handed. If they thought they had already taken everything from me, they were about to learn how wrong they were. And the first hint of how deep this betrayal truly went would come later that same night when I opened a drawer in Daniel's home office and found a document that proved this wasn't just an affair. It was a plan to erase me completely. That night, I did something I had never done in 32 years of marriage. I pretended everything was normal. I cooked dinner. I set the table with our anniversary china. I even lit the ivory candles Daniel used to say made me look younger in their glow. He arrived home at 6:45, exactly on time, just as he had for decades. If anyone had watched us from outside the large windows of our seaside house, they would have seen an ordinary, older couple celebrating a milestone. They would never have guessed that less than 12 hours earlier, I had watched him kiss my son's wife in our backyard spa. Daniel kissed my cheek lightly when he walked in. "Smells good," he said. The casualness of it nearly made me laugh. Not nervous laughter, the kind that comes when reality becomes so twisted it stops feeling real. We ate quietly. He talked about the hardware supply company he had run for 30 years. I nodded at the right moments, asked questions, like I always did. But inside, I was observing him like a stranger. His hands, his posture, his lack of tension. He wasn't worried, which meant one thing: he believed I had no power. After dinner, he went upstairs to shower. That was when I moved. Daniel had always been predictable. His office door stayed locked during the day, but at night, he often left it slightly open because he liked to feel accessible, as he used to say. Tonight, the door was open. I stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of leather and printer ink. The desk was perfectly organized as always. But something was different. A thin, black folder sat near the keyboard, partially tucked under a stack of invoices. I knew instantly it didn't belong there. Daniel hated clutter. I opened it and felt the floor drop out from under me. At the top was a legal document. Last will and testament. My eyes scanned quickly. Daniel Carter. Date 6 months ago. My name appeared once. Just once. In a single cold line. To my spouse, Marjorie Ellen Carter, I leave the sum of $1. $1. My hands began shaking so violently, I had to grip the desk. Everything else. The house. The company. The investment accounts. The coastal property in Lincoln County. Even the life insurance policy. All of it was designated to 2 people. My son Ryan Carter and his wife, Vanessa Carter. My breath came in short, shallow bursts. The words blurred, then sharpened again, as another line caught my attention. In the event of marital dissolution, assets shall remain protected under the family trust structure established in 2018. Family trust. I had never heard of any trust. Not once, which meant this hadn't just been an affair. It had been a coordinated, long-term financial betrayal. A slow, deliberate effort to remove me from the life I helped build. A memory slammed into me then. 3 years ago. Daniel insisting we simplify paperwork. Him handling meetings with lawyers alone because he said the legal language stressed me out. Vanessa suddenly taking an interest in the company books, claiming she wanted to support the family business. At the time, I had felt grateful. Now I understood. They hadn't been helping. They had been preparing. A sound creaked upstairs. I quickly put the documents back exactly as I found them. But as I turned to leave, one last item slipped from the folder onto the desk. A letter, typed, unsigned. I picked it up and read the first line. Marjorie must never discover the inheritance restructuring before the transition is complete. My knees nearly buckled. Transition, not divorce, not separation. Transition, which meant they weren't planning to just remove me legally. They were planning to replace me entirely. And in that moment, standing alone in Daniel's office, with proof of both emotional and financial betrayal in my hands, a cold, steady clarity settled over me. They thought I was weak, predictable, easy to erase. They had no idea that the quiet woman they had spent years underestimating was about to become the most dangerous opponent they had ever faced. Because what they didn't know yet was that I had a secret of my own, one that could destroy every plan they had made. And it all began with a phone call I placed at exactly 9:17 that night to someone Daniel believed had disappeared from our lives forever. At 9:17 that night, my hand hovered over the contact name I had not touched in nearly 15 years. Evelyn Hart, Daniel's older sister, the woman he hadn't spoken to since what he always called the betrayal. Back then, I believed his version without question. He said Evelyn had tried to steal money from the company during its early years. He said she was manipulative, bitter, and dangerous. He said cutting her out of our lives was necessary to protect our family. I trusted him. I always trusted him. Now, staring at the will that excluded me, the hidden trust I never knew existed, and the letter that spoke of transition, I understood something that made my stomach twist. If Daniel had lied to me about finances once, he could have lied about Evelyn too. My thumb pressed the call button. The line rang 3 times. Then a woman answered her voice, cautious but steady. Hello. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Hearing her voice again felt like opening a sealed room full of dust and memories. Evelyn, I said finally. It's Marjorie. Silence. Then a sharp inhale. Marjorie, she whispered. After all these years, emotion tightened my throat, but I forced myself to stay focused. I need to ask you something, I said quietly, and I need you to be completely honest. Another pause. Did Daniel ever tell you why he really cut you out of the company? Her response came instantly. No, she said. He told you a story, didn't he? My heart pounded. Yes, I whispered. A bitter laugh came through the phone. Of course he did. He always was good at rewriting history. My fingers tightened around the phone. Then tell me the truth. Her voice lowered. The truth, she said slowly, is that I caught him. A chill ran through me. Caught him doing what? Creating a shell trust to hide assets from you. The room spun. My free hand shot out to grip the edge of the desk. What I breathed. This was years ago, she continued, before Ryan even married Vanessa. Daniel was already planning a financial structure that would keep everything under his control, while technically appearing shared. My mind raced. But why would he do that? I asked. Evelyn's answer came soft. Because he never believed the company belonged to both of you, Marjorie. He believed it was his. He always resented that you funded the startup with your inheritance from your grandmother. My grandmother. The word inheritance slammed into me like a physical blow. 40 years ago, I had invested nearly every dollar she left me into Daniel's hardware business when it was just a small warehouse. Without that money, there would be no company, no coastal house, no retirement accounts, nothing. And yet, he had been planning to erase me financially for years. I tried to stop him, Evelyn said. That's why he cut me off. I refused to sign the trust documents. The pieces clicked together rapidly now. The secret trust, the will, Vanessa's sudden involvement. This wasn't a recent betrayal. It had been evolving for decades. My voice trembled. Evelyn, can you prove any of this? A long pause followed. Then she said something that made my pulse spike. Yes, I straightened. How? Because Daniel never realized I kept copies, she said. Original drafts, emails, even recordings of meetings with the lawyers. My heart slammed against my ribs. Evidence, real evidence, the kind that could destroy his legal protection. I still have everything, she added quietly. I kept it because I always believed one day you'd need to know. Tears burned my eyes, but they weren't tears of weakness. They were the release of a truth finally surfacing. For years, I had believed Evelyn was the villain in our family drama. Now I understood. She had been the only one who tried to protect me. Will you help me? I asked. Her answer came without hesitation. Yes, Marjorie. Relief and adrenaline surged through me simultaneously. But before we ended the call, she said one more thing. "There's something else you should know." My stomach tightened. "What?" "Vanessa didn't just marry Ryan by chance," Evelyn said quietly. "She was introduced to Daniel years before the wedding." The words felt like ice water down my spine. "What do you mean?" Evelyn's voice turned grim. "I mean, she said that your daughter-in-law didn't just betray you after joining the family. She was placed there." The line went silent, and for the first time since that afternoon in the spa, I felt true, bone-deep fear. Because if Vanessa had entered our family as part of Daniel's long game, then this wasn't just betrayal. It was a strategy, a carefully constructed takeover that had been unfolding right inside my home for years. And I had no idea how deep it went, but I was about to find out. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed beside Daniel, listening to his steady breathing in the dark, and felt like I was lying next to a stranger wearing my husband's face. Every small detail now seemed sinister. The way he slept so peacefully, the way his hand rested loosely near mine, as if nothing in our world had changed, as if he hadn't spent years planning my financial disappearance, as if he hadn't been in a spa with my daughter-in-law less than 12 hours earlier. Around 2 in the morning, he shifted slightly and murmured something unintelligible in his sleep. For a brief, painful moment, memory pulled me backward to the younger Daniel, the man who once held my hand in hospital waiting rooms, who cried when our son was born, who told me we were partners in everything. I felt a tear slip down my temple into my hair. Then I remembered the will, $1, and the softness inside me hardened into steel. By dawn, I had made 3 decisions. I would not confront him yet. I would gather proof first. And most importantly, I would act like nothing had changed. The next morning, Daniel left early for the office. He kissed my cheek before walking out. "Dinner tonight?" he asked casually. I nodded. "Of course." As soon as his car disappeared down the driveway, I moved. I called Evelyn again. "I want to meet," I said. "Today?" She replied immediately. "There's a cafe in Portland. Quiet, private." 2 hours later, I was sitting across from her for the first time in 15 years. Time had changed her appearance, but not her eyes. They were still sharp, observant, and filled with a quiet intensity. For a moment, we simply looked at each other. Then she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm so sorry, Marjorie." The sincerity in her voice nearly broke me, but I held steady. "Show me," I said. She opened a large leather folder. Inside were copies of documents spanning decades, early trust drafts, emails between Daniel and financial attorneys discussing asset shielding from spousal claims, even transcripts of meetings. My chest tightened as I flipped through them. Every page confirmed the same horrifying truth. Daniel had never seen me as an equal partner. He had seen me as a financial risk. Then, Evelyn slid one final document toward me. "This," she said quietly, "is the most important one." It was dated just 3 years ago. The heading read, "Family Transition Plan." My eyes scanned the text and stopped cold at one specific section. Phase 3. Transfer operational control to VC upon stabilization of marital separation conditions. VC. Vanessa Carter. The air left my lungs. "They were planning for her to run the company," I whispered. Evelyn nodded. "Yes, she has an MBA in corporate restructuring. Daniel recruited her years before she even met Ryan." The words felt unreal. "You're saying—" I swallowed. "Their relationship started before she became my daughter-in-law." Evelyn's gaze held mine. Yes, the room seemed to tilt. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't even just financial manipulation. It was infiltration, a calculated insertion into my family to eventually push me out completely. I pressed my fingers to my temples, trying to steady the wave of shock. Then Evelyn spoke again. "There's something else," she said carefully. My stomach dropped. "What now?" She hesitated, then slid a photograph across the table. It showed Daniel and Vanessa sitting together at a restaurant. The timestamp, printed in the corner, made my blood run cold. It was dated 5 years before Vanessa ever met my son. They've been connected far longer than you think, Evelyn said. And if you don't act quickly, her voice lowered, they're about to finalize the last step of the plan. I looked up sharply. What last step? Evelyn's expression turned grave. The one that legally removes you from everything. And it's scheduled to happen within the next 30 days. My heart began pounding so hard, it felt painful. 30 days. That was all the time I had left before they erased me completely. But as fear surged through me, something stronger rose with it. Resolve. Because for the first time since discovering their betrayal, I wasn't powerless anymore. I had proof. I had an ally. And I had something they didn't know yet. A hidden leverage that could destroy their entire scheme in a single move. What they didn't realize was that the woman they thought they were quietly replacing had already started planning her counterattack. And the first strike would come sooner than they ever expected. On the drive home from Portland, I didn't turn on the radio. Silence felt safer. Silence let me think. The highway stretched ahead of me in a gray ribbon, lined with damp autumn trees whose leaves had begun to curl and fall. I had driven this route hundreds of times over the years, usually thinking about groceries, family dinners, or which birthday gift my grandchildren might like. Today, I thought about strategy, because this was no longer just about heartbreak. It was about survival. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the shock had settled into something colder and far more dangerous clarity. Daniel and Vanessa had spent years building their plan. That meant I could not afford to react emotionally. I needed leverage, real leverage, the kind that would force them onto defensive ground. And suddenly, something Evelyn had said earlier returned to me. You funded the startup with your grandmother's inheritance. My grandmother, Eleanor Whitcomb, a quiet woman with sharp instincts and an almost obsessive need for documentation. She had lived through 2 divorces and a business betrayal of her own. Because of that, she had always told me one thing: never give away money without protecting yourself, Marjorie. At the time, I thought she meant emotionally. Now, I realized she had meant legally. A memory flickered. A locked cedar chest, hidden in the attic of our home. I hadn't opened it in over 20 years. My pulse quickened as I stepped inside the house and headed straight upstairs. The attic smelled faintly of dust and old wood. Sunlight filtered through a small circular window, illuminating floating particles in the air like suspended time. The cedar chest sat exactly where I remembered. I knelt and lifted the lid. Inside were photo albums, letters, and beneath them, a sealed envelope labeled in my grandmother's careful handwriting. For Marjorie, only if ever necessary. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were several documents. The first was a notarized investment agreement, dated more than 35 years ago. I scanned the text, and my heart began pounding. It clearly stated that the initial capital I provided to Daniel's company was classified not as a marital gift, but as a protected investment loan, with a clause: if ownership or control of the company is ever transferred without the written consent of Marjorie Whitcomb Carter, all original assets and derived equity revert to her estate. My breath hitched. Revert to her? That meant something Daniel never anticipated. Legally, I still had the claim to everything. The company, the property, the assets built from my original funding. And he couldn't transfer control to Vanessa without triggering that clause. I sank back onto my heels, stunned. All these years, he had been working under the assumption that my investment had legally merged into marital property. But my grandmother, she had protected me in a way I never fully understood until now. Tears blurred my vision, but they were not tears of pain. They were tears of fierce gratitude. Thank you, I whispered into the quiet attic. At that moment, a realization hit me like a lightning strike. Daniel didn't just underestimate my strength. He underestimated my foundation. He thought he was erasing a dependent wife. He had no idea he was challenging the legal owner of the empire he believed was his. And that changed everything. But as I carefully placed the documents back into the envelope, another thought surfaced. This leverage was powerful, but it was also dangerous. Because if Daniel discovered I had this before I was ready, he could act first. He could try to rush the transition. Or worse, he could attempt to discredit me. My mind moved quickly now. I needed to secure this evidence. I needed legal counsel. And most importantly, I needed to understand one final piece of the puzzle. Why Vanessa? Not just why she worked with Daniel, but why she agreed to destroy an entire family to do it. As if summoned by the thought, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. The caller ID made my stomach drop. Ryan, my son. He almost never called during work hours. I answered slowly. Hi, sweetheart. There was a pause. Then his voice came through strained and uneasy. Mom, are you home? Yes, I said carefully. Another pause. Then he said something that sent a cold wave through my entire body. I think something's wrong with Vanessa. My grip tightened on the phone. What do you mean? He exhaled shakily. She's been acting strange for weeks. Secretive, defensive. And today, I found something in her laptop that I don't understand. My heart began to race. What did you find? His next words landed like a bomb. Emails between her and Dad. And they're not about the company. My pulse roared in my ears. Because in that instant, I realized something terrifying. The betrayal I thought was already fully exposed was about to become even deeper. Ryan arrived 20 minutes later. He walked into the house looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight, and his eyes carried a confusion that cut straight through my heart. For a moment, I saw him not as the 38-year-old father of two, but as the little boy who used to run into my arms after nightmares. Mom, he said quietly. I pulled him into a hug. He held on longer than usual. Something was very wrong. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I had packed his school lunches for years. Now he placed his laptop in front of me with trembling hands. I didn't know who else to talk to, he said. I can't go to Dad, and I don't understand what I'm seeing. My chest tightened. Show me. He opened an email thread, and as I read, my blood ran cold. The messages were between Daniel and Vanessa, but they weren't romantic. They were transactional, cold, strategic. One message from Daniel read, once the marital dissolution is finalized, you will assume operational leadership. Ryan must remain unaware until after the asset transfer. My breath caught. I glanced at my son. He was staring at the table, his face pale. There's more, he whispered. He scrolled down. Another message from Vanessa. Understood. Emotional management of Ryan remains stable. He will comply once documentation is presented. The words felt like knives. Emotional management, not husband, not partner, an asset to control. Ryan swallowed hard. Mom, what does that mean? Pain surged through me, sharp and protective. It took every ounce of strength not to tell him everything immediately. But I needed him steady. I chose my words carefully. It means, I said softly, that your father and your wife have been planning something behind all of our backs. His head snapped up. What kind of something? Before I could answer, he clicked another file. It was a document titled Custody Transition Considerations. My heart slammed against my ribs. Ryan read aloud, his voice breaking. Children's primary residence to remain within Carter Family Trust properties to ensure asset continuity. He looked at me in horror. They were planning where my kids would live without telling me. Tears burned his eyes. They've been using me, he whispered. Haven't they? I reached across the table and gripped his hands. Yes, I said gently, but not anymore. He stared at me, confusion mixing with rising anger. What do you mean? For the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed a hint of steel into my voice. I mean, I said quietly, that your father and Vanessa made one critical mistake. Ryan leaned forward. What mistake? They underestimated me. His brow furrowed. Mom, what are you saying? I held his gaze. I'm saying they don't actually control the company the way they think they do. Shock flashed across his face. They don't? No, I said firmly. And if they try to finalize their plan, I paused, letting the weight of the truth settle. They will lose everything. Ryan stared at me stunned. For a moment, hope flickered in his expression, but then something else surfaced. Fear. Mom, he said slowly, if you fight them, Dad won't just give up. His voice lowered. He can be ruthless. I met his gaze steadily. I know. A long silence followed. Then he asked the question that made my stomach tighten again. What's the next move? I leaned back slightly, feeling the calm precision of strategy settle fully into place for the first time. The next move, I said quietly, is to let them believe they're winning. Ryan frowned. What do you mean? I took a slow breath. It means I said we wait for them to make their final move. Because when they do, I felt a cold, controlled determination spread through me. That's when we destroy their entire plan in one strike. Ryan stared at me stunned by the certainty in my voice. But what neither of us knew yet was that Daniel had already begun accelerating his timeline, and the confrontation we thought was weeks away was about to arrive far sooner than expected. 3 days later, Daniel made his move. It happened on a Tuesday morning, the kind of quiet, gray Oregon morning that usually passed without significance. I was in the kitchen rinsing coffee cups when he walked in, wearing his navy suit instead of his usual business casual. That alone was enough to tell me something was coming. Daniel hated formal clothes, unless there was a legal meeting or major contract involved. Big day, I asked lightly, keeping my voice calm. He hesitated just slightly before answering. Yes, he said. Actually, we need to talk. There it was, the words every spouse fears. But I had been waiting for them. I dried my hands slowly and sat across from him at the table. He didn't sit immediately. Instead, he stood there, hands in his pockets, like a lawyer, preparing to deliver a practiced statement. Marjorie, he began, our marriage hasn't been working for a long time. I almost admired the precision of his tone. Not cruel, not apologetic, clinical, like he was dissolving a business partnership rather than ending a 32-year marriage. I think he continued, it would be best for both of us to move forward separately. I nodded slowly, as if absorbing difficult news. Inside, my pulse remained steady. Are you asking for a divorce? I asked quietly. Yes, he said. He exhaled in visible relief, clearly expecting an emotional reaction that never came. I've already spoken with attorneys, he continued. We can make the process smooth. You'll be taken care of. Taken care of? The phrase landed like acid, but I kept my expression neutral. What does that mean exactly? I asked. He reached into his briefcase and slid a folder across the table. Just a standard settlement, he said. The house will be sold. You'll receive a generous monthly support allowance, enough to live comfortably. I opened the folder and saw exactly what I expected. The terms were carefully structured. No ownership, no claim to the company, no access to investment accounts. Just a modest monthly payment tied to a non-contest clause. If I challenged any part of the agreement, the payments would stop. I looked up slowly. You've planned this for a while, I said. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. I've prepared responsibly, he corrected. Of course, prepared, not betrayed, not deceived, prepared. I closed the folder gently. And Vanessa, I asked calmly. For the first time, his eyes sharpened. This isn't about her. We both knew that was a lie, but he held my gaze steadily. I hope you'll handle this with dignity, he added. For Ryan's sake, for the grandchildren. The audacity of invoking the children nearly made my hands shake, but I stayed perfectly still. Because this moment was not about emotional release. It was about positioning. I leaned back slightly, and if I don't sign, his expression hardened. Then the process becomes complicated. A quiet threat, legal pressure, financial isolation, reputation damage. I had lived with this man long enough to understand every layer of what he wasn't saying. But he still underestimated one thing: my calm. I met his eyes and gave a small, thoughtful nod. "I see," I said softly. He waited, expecting resistance, anger, tears. Instead, I did something that made his brows draw together in confusion. I smiled, a steady, composed smile. "Daniel," I said gently, "I agree." The silence that followed was absolute. Shock flashed across his face before he could hide it. "You agree," he repeated. "Yes," I said. "I think you're right. It's time to move forward separately." His posture relaxed instantly, relief washing through him. "Thank you," he said. "That's mature of you." Mature. The word almost made me laugh, but I kept my voice calm. "I do have one request," I added. His guard lowered further. "What is it?" "I'd like us to announce this together," I said, "at Thanksgiving dinner, with the family present, so there's no confusion." He hesitated. I could see the calculation in his eyes. A public announcement would make the transition look orderly, respectable, clean, exactly the image he valued. Finally, he nodded. "That's reasonable." He extended his hand across the table. I shook it. His grip felt warm, familiar, and completely foreign at the same time. Because while he believed he had just secured his victory, he had actually walked straight into the final stage of my counterattack. And Thanksgiving dinner would become the battlefield where everything he built on lies would collapse. But there was one piece of information he still didn't know, one critical detail that would ensure his downfall. And I would deliver it at the exact moment he believed he had already won. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving felt surreal. On the surface, everything appeared normal. Daniel and I maintained polite routines. We shared meals. We discussed family logistics. We even coordinated holiday plans together. To anyone watching, we looked like a couple transitioning peacefully into separation. Exactly what he wanted the world to see. But beneath that calm surface, the tension was tightening like a drawn wire. Ryan visited frequently. Each time, his anger toward his father and Vanessa simmered just below the surface. I could see how deeply the betrayal had wounded him. One evening, after the grandchildren had gone to bed, he sat across from me in the living room. "I still can't believe they planned all this," he said quietly. "For years." I nodded. "People are capable of long-term deception when power and money are involved." He studied me. "You're incredibly calm about this." A small, sad smile touched my lips. "Calm doesn't mean I'm not hurt," I said. "It means I know exactly what I'm going to do." His eyes searched mine. "Are you sure this will work?" I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out the envelope containing my grandmother's investment agreement. I handed it to him. As he read, his expression shifted from confusion to shock. "Mom," he whispered, "this means the company legally belongs to you." "Not entirely," I corrected gently. "But it means Daniel cannot transfer ownership without my consent." Ryan looked up stunned. "So if he tries to put Vanessa in charge, the entire trust structure collapses?" I finished. Silence filled the room. Then a slow, fierce smile spread across his face. "He has no idea, does he?" "No," I said quietly. "And that," I added, "is what will make this work." Thanksgiving Day arrived cold and bright. The Carter family gathered at our coastal home, just as we had every year for decades. The long dining table was set with autumn decorations. The grandchildren ran through the house laughing. The scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon filled the air. From the outside, it looked like a perfect American holiday. But beneath the surface, everything was about to explode. Daniel sat at the head of the table, composed and confident. Vanessa sat beside Ryan, her posture graceful, her smile carefully controlled. She met my eyes once across the table. There was no warmth there, only calculation. She believed she was hours away from stepping into the life she had been preparing for years to claim. After dinner, Daniel stood and cleared his throat. Before dessert, he said, "Marjorie and I have an announcement." The room quieted. My grandchildren looked up curiously. Ryan sat very still. Vanessa's fingers tightened slightly around her wine glass. Daniel placed his hand lightly on the back of my chair. "We've decided," he continued smoothly, "to end our marriage amicably. We believe it's the best step for both of us moving forward." A ripple of shocked murmurs moved through the room. I rose slowly beside him, and for one brief moment, I allowed silence to stretch. Then I spoke. "Yes," I said calmly. "That part is true." Daniel's expression flickered with confusion, but before he could react, I reached into my purse and placed a thick folder on the table. "And now," I continued, my voice steady and clear, "it's time for the rest of the truth to come out." Vanessa's face went pale instantly. Daniel's posture stiffened. Ryan leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on me. The air in the room felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Because in the next 60 seconds, everything Daniel and Vanessa had built in secrecy was about to collapse in front of the entire family. And neither of them had any idea how devastating that collapse would be. For a moment, after I placed the folder on the Thanksgiving table, no one moved. The grandchildren had been sent into the living room to watch a movie just minutes earlier, and now I was deeply grateful for that. What was about to unfold was not something children should ever witness. Daniel's hand slowly slipped off the back of my chair. His voice came out tight. "Marjorie," he said quietly, "this isn't the time for dramatics." Dramatics. The word hung in the air like an insult. I met his eyes steadily. "You're right," I said calmly. "It isn't." I opened the folder, and that's exactly why I waited until now. Vanessa's posture had gone rigid. Her fingers were clenched so tightly around her napkin that her knuckles had turned white. Ryan sat frozen, his gaze moving between us. I took out the first document. "This," I said, holding it up, "is the investment agreement signed when I funded the original Carter Hardware Company." Daniel's face didn't change at first, but his eyes sharpened. "What about it?" he asked carefully. I placed the document on the table in front of him. "You may want to read Clause 4. He didn't move. For a long second, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the wall clock. Then he picked it up. I watched his eyes scan the page, and for the first time in 32 years of marriage, I saw Daniel Carter lose control. The color drained from his face. "That's not," he began, then stopped. I spoke quietly, but every word landed with precision. "It states that if ownership or control of the company is transferred without my written consent, all assets revert to me." A stunned silence fell over the table. Ryan leaned forward, eyes wide. "Dad, is that true?" Daniel didn't answer, because he couldn't. His silence was answer enough. Vanessa's breathing had grown shallow. I could see panic rising behind the composure she had perfected for years. I reached into the folder again, and this, I continued, is evidence of a hidden family trust, created without my knowledge to shield assets from me. Gasps broke out around the table. One of Daniel's cousins muttered, "What the hell?" I laid out copies of the trust drafts Evelyn had provided, emails, meeting transcripts, each page like a piece of a puzzle, snapping into place. Daniel's jaw clenched. "This is private legal material," he snapped. "You had no right to access it." I held his gaze calmly. "No," I said softly. "You had no right to create it in secret." His eyes flickered with anger now. But beneath that anger, I saw something far more powerful. Fear. Vanessa finally spoke. Her voice was tight, almost brittle. "This doesn't change anything," she said. "The trust is legally binding." I turned toward her slowly. "And that," I said, "is where you're wrong." I lifted one final document. "The trust collapses if it conflicts with the original investment agreement." I placed it directly in front of her. "And yours does." The silence that followed felt electric. Vanessa stared down at the paper, her lips parting slightly. For the first time since I had met her, her carefully controlled mask cracked completely. "This," she whispered. "This wasn't in the records." "Of course it wasn't," I replied, because Daniel never knew it existed. All eyes turned to him. His face had gone ashen. "You hid this from me," he said hoarsely. I shook my head slowly. "No, my grandmother protected me, and you never bothered to check." The truth hit him fully then. Years of planning, decades of financial maneuvering, all built on a single fatal assumption: that I had no legal power. And now that entire foundation was collapsing in front of him. Ryan pushed back his chair abruptly. "Is it true?" he demanded. "All of it. The trust, the emails planning behind Mom's back." Daniel opened his mouth, but no explanation came, because there wasn't one that could fix this. Ryan's voice broke. "You used me," he whispered. "You used my wife. You used our family." Vanessa looked up sharply. "Ryan, don't," he snapped. His eyes were filled with devastation. I read the emails. Her face went white. "You called me emotionally manageable." The words echoed like a gunshot. Vanessa flinched as if struck. Ryan stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly across the floor. "I trusted you," he said, his voice shaking. "Both of you." He turned and walked out of the room. The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the house. Daniel remained frozen, staring at the documents like they were written in a language he no longer understood. And in that moment, I saw something I never thought I would witness: the complete collapse of his certainty, because everything he believed he controlled was gone. But I wasn't finished. There was still one final truth left to reveal, and it was the one that would shatter Vanessa's last remaining defense completely. Vanessa recovered faster than Daniel. That was the first thing I noticed as the silence stretched after Ryan left the house. Her shoulders slowly straightened, her breathing steadied, and when she finally looked up at me again, there was something new in her eyes. Not panic, calculation. She had spent years building emotional armor, and even now, with the trust collapsing around her, she was trying to find an angle. "This doesn't change operational authority," she said carefully. "Daniel still controls the company's daily management." A faint murmur rippled through the family members, still seated around the table. Daniel seized on her words like a drowning man grabbing a lifeline. "Yes," he said quickly. "This agreement affects ownership structure, not leadership." He turned toward me, his voice gaining strength. "You can't just take the company from me." For a moment, I said nothing. I simply studied them, the two people who had spent years believing they were the smartest players in the room. Then I spoke quietly. "You're right." Both of them stiffened. I reached into my purse one final time, and that's why I prepared something else. I placed a sealed envelope on the table. Daniel frowned. "What is that?" I slid it toward him. "Open it." His hands were not steady as he broke the seal. Inside was a legal notice. His eyes moved rapidly across the page, then stopped and widened in horror, because this document was not from me. It was from the State Corporate Oversight Office. Notice of investigation into undisclosed asset transfers and trust structure irregularities. Daniel's face went completely white. "What is this?" he whispered. I answered calmly. "It's an official inquiry triggered when Evelyn submitted documentation showing unauthorized restructuring tied to my original investment." His head snapped up. "You reported this?" "No," I said quietly. "Your sister did." The room felt suddenly colder. Vanessa leaned forward, reading over his shoulder. As she reached the final paragraph, her composure shattered completely. Her voice came out in a strained whisper. "If this investigation confirms concealment," she couldn't finish the sentence, but Daniel could. "The company could be frozen," he said hoarsely. "Yes," I replied, "and leadership authority suspended." The words landed like a final blow, because in that instant, both of them understood something irreversible. Their plan hadn't just failed. It had triggered legal consequences they could no longer control. Vanessa's voice rose sharp with desperation. "You can't do this," she said. "This destroys everything. The business, the employees, the family." I held her gaze steadily. "No," I said quietly. "You did that." Silence fell again. Daniel sank slowly into his chair. His shoulders slumped for the first time in decades. All his certainty, all his authority, gone. Vanessa stared at the note, her hands trembling. And for the first time since I discovered them in the spa, I saw real fear in her eyes. Not fear of losing money, not fear of losing status, fear of losing control. Because everything she had built her future around was collapsing in real time. I rose from my seat. My voice remained calm. "I didn't start this war," I said, "but I am finishing it." I turned toward the doorway, but before leaving the room, I paused, because there was still one final revelation left. The truth that would change not just their future, but mine. And I knew it was time for them to hear it. When I paused at the doorway, every eye in the room followed me. Daniel looked hollow now, as if the structure that had supported him his entire adult life had suddenly been stripped away. Vanessa sat rigid, her hands still trembling on the table, her face drained of color. For years they had controlled the narrative. Now they were waiting for me to define it. I turned back slowly. "There's one more thing you both need to understand," I said quietly. My voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made the room feel almost too still. Daniel swallowed. "What else could there possibly be?" he asked hoarsely. I walked back to the table and placed my hands lightly on its polished surface. "This was never about taking everything from you," I said. "It was about reclaiming what was already mine." He shook his head weakly. "You've already destroyed my reputation. The company is under investigation. What more do you want?" I met his gaze. "The truth," I said softly. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. "What truth?" I turned toward Vanessa. "For years," I said, "you told yourself this was just strategy, that you were playing a long game for stability, power, security." Her eyes narrowed slightly, defensive. "I did what I had to do," she said tightly. "Did you?" I asked. I reached into my purse one final time. Not for legal documents this time, but for a small envelope. Inside was a single photograph. I slid it across the table. Vanessa stared at it, and for the first time that evening, her composure didn't just crack. It shattered completely. Her lips parted in shock. "No," she whispered. Daniel frowned. "What is that?" I spoke quietly. "It's from 12 years ago. A women's business leadership seminar in Chicago." Daniel looked confused, but Vanessa knew. Her eyes filled with a mixture of horror and realization. Because in the photograph, she was standing beside me, smiling, young, ambitious, eager. She looked up slowly. You remember that?" she whispered. "Yes," I said. "I remember the young woman who told me she wanted to build ethical companies, who believed leadership meant protecting people, not manipulating them." Tears welled in her eyes. "You wrote to me afterward," I continued gently. "You said I inspired you." The room was silent. Even Daniel looked stunned now. "I didn't know who you were when you first met Ryan," I said, "but I recognized you later. I just couldn't understand why you never acknowledged it." Vanessa's voice shook, because by then, it was too late. The truth hung in the air. Years ago, she had once admired me, and then she chose to betray everything she claimed to value. Not out of desperation, not out of necessity, but out of ambition. Her shoulders began to shake. "I thought," she whispered, tears falling. "Now I thought this was how power worked. Daniel told me the world rewarded those who took control before others could." Daniel stared at her, stunned. "You agreed to this," he said harshly. "You wanted this." "Yes," she said, her voice breaking, "but not like this." The room fell into a heavy silence. I felt something inside me shift. Not forgiveness, but release. Because the final truth was clear now. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about choices. Daniel had chosen control over partnership. Vanessa had chosen ambition over integrity. And now they were facing the consequences of both. I straightened. "The investigation will proceed," I said calmly. "The company will likely be restructured. Employees will be protected." Daniel's voice was barely audible. "And you?" I took a slow breath. For the first time in decades, I said quietly, "I'm going to live a life that isn't defined by your decisions." His shoulders sagged because he finally understood. This wasn't revenge driven by rage. It was justice built on truth, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of a small coastal inn in Northern California, watching the sun sink slowly into the Pacific Ocean. The air smelled of salt and eucalyptus. The sound of waves rolling against the shore felt steady grounding. For the first time in years, my life was quiet, peaceful, free. The investigation into the company had concluded 3 months earlier. The results were exactly as Evelyn predicted. The hidden trust had been ruled invalid due to concealment and conflict with my original investment agreement. The company was placed under temporary oversight, then restructured. A new executive board was formed. I retained majority ownership, but I chose not to resume daily operations. Instead, I appointed a professional management team. The employees were protected, their jobs secure. That had always been my true priority. Daniel resigned shortly after the investigation began. His reputation never fully recovered. We finalized our divorce quietly. He moved into a small apartment inland. We haven't spoken since. Vanessa filed for divorce from Ryan soon after everything came out. There were custody negotiations, painful conversations, and long months of emotional rebuilding. But today, Ryan and the children were healing. He visited me often now, not out of obligation, but out of genuine closeness we had rediscovered after the truth came to light. Evelyn and I had grown close again too. For years, she had carried the weight of being cast as the family villain. Now that burden was finally gone. As for me, I used part of the company's profits to create something new, a foundation supporting women over 50 who had been financially betrayed in marriages. Women who, like me, had spent decades building lives only to be quietly excluded from them, helping them find legal resources, financial education, and most importantly, their voice again. Because betrayal doesn't just take money, it tries to take identity. And reclaiming that identity is the most powerful form of justice there is. As the last light of the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt something settle fully inside me. Not anger, not sadness, but closure. I had lost a marriage, but I had reclaimed myself. And that, in the end, was worth far more than anything Daniel ever tried to take from me. If you've ever experienced betrayal manipulation or been quietly pushed aside by people who underestimated your strength, remember this: your silence is not weakness. Sometimes it is preparation. And when the moment is right, truth has a way of bringing its own form of karma. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories about justice, resilience, and the quiet power of starting over.